Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now. The words cut through the desert night like cold steel, sharp and final, hanging in the air just long enough to make the silence that followed feel heavier than it should have been. The red and blue lights painted the asphalt in restless pulses, stretching across miles of empty highway just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, where the wind carried dust in slow, whispering spirals across the road. Danielle Brooks didn't move right away. Her hands rested calmly on the steering wheel of her 18-wheeler, engine still humming low beneath her boots, a steady vibration that traveled up through the cabin like a heartbeat refusing to panic. She glanced into the side mirror, watching the patrol car behind her. Doors open, silhouettes shifting, radios crackling with static that sounded too loud for such an open stretch of land. The air outside looked cold, dry, the kind that stung your lungs if you breathed too fast. Inside the cab, it was warmer, but the tension pressed in from every direction, thick and invisible. Ma'am, this is your second request. The officer's voice came again, closer now, firmer, carrying that tone that wasn't about safety. It was about control. Danielle exhaled slowly, her breath steady, controlled, the way she had trained it to be years ago, long before highways and freight logs and overnight routes became her life. Her fingers flexed once against the wheel, then stilled. No sudden movements. No unnecessary words. Outside, boots crunched lightly against gravel as another officer moved along the trailer, his flashlight beam slicing across the metal doors, lingering longer than needed, as if searching for something that hadn't been there a moment ago, but might appear if he stared hard enough. Danielle's eyes tracked that light in the mirror, not with fear, but with awareness, measured, precise, the kind that didn't miss details. The radio on her dashboard hissed faintly, a half-finished weather report cutting in and out, mentioning a temperature drop into the low 40s before dawn. She reached up and turned it off with a quiet click, the small sound somehow louder than the engine itself. Silence settled again, thicker now. She could feel it pressing against the glass, against her chest, against the space between her thoughts. Then, finally, she opened the door. The metal creaked softly as it swung outward, releasing a breath of warm air into the cold night. Danielle stepped down slowly, boots hitting the asphalt with a dull, grounded sound. 5'9", steady posture, shoulders relaxed, not submissive, not aggressive, just present. The officer standing closest, Ryan Cole, his name badge catching a flicker of red light, watched her with narrowed eyes, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a flashlight angled just high enough to meet her face. Not blinding, not polite, deliberate. License and registration, he said, though his gaze had already moved past the request, scanning her, measuring her, deciding something without saying it. Danielle didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, not challenging, not lowering her gaze either, just meeting it. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the edge of her jacket, carrying the faint scent of diesel and dry earth. Somewhere far down the highway, a car passed, its headlights briefly streaking across the horizon before disappearing into the dark. The moment stretched. Not broken, not rushed, just held there, balanced on something neither of them said out loud. Danielle reached back into the cab without breaking eye contact, her movements slow, deliberate, the kind that did not invite suspicion yet did not surrender control, and she retrieved a worn leather wallet from the console beside her logbook, its edges softened by years of handling, the surface catching a faint reflection of the flashing lights as she stepped down fully onto the asphalt, the cool night air settling against her skin like a quiet reminder to stay grounded, to stay measured, to stay exactly where she was in this moment and nowhere else. And when she handed the license over, her fingers did not tremble, they did not rush. They simply released it into Officer Cole's hand with a calm that felt almost out of place under the circumstances, but not to her, not anymore, because calm was not something she borrowed from the situation, it was something she carried with her, something built over time in places far louder and far less forgiving than this empty stretch of highway. And Cole took the card without a word, his eyes flicking down briefly before returning to her face, as if the name alone did not satisfy whatever conclusion he had already begun forming in his mind. And behind him, the second officer's flashlight continued its slow path along the trailer doors, pausing at the latch, then the seal, then the edges as though searching for a reason to justify the stop after it had already happened, and the radio on Cole's shoulder crackled again, a dispatcher's voice half clear, half swallowed by static, mentioning a report that did not quite match the vehicle in front of them, not in color, not in plate, not in timing, but close enough to linger in the air as possibility, and Cole shifted his weight slightly, glancing back at the trailer before stepping closer again, closing the distance by just a few inches. Enough to feel intentional, enough to test space, and Danielle noticed it, not with tension, but with awareness, the kind that cataloged small movements without reacting to them. And she spoke then, her voice even, low, steady, carrying no edge but no submission either, asking what the reason for the stop was, the words simple, direct, leaving no room for misinterpretation, and for a moment Cole did not answer, his jaw tightening just enough to catch the light as he looked past her again, then back, as if deciding how much to say, or how little, before he responded with something vague about a routine check, about matching a description, about needing to verify cargo, and the explanation hung there, thin, incomplete, the kind that filled space without resolving it, and Danielle listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, more focused, because she had heard that tone before in different forms, in different uniforms, in different environments, where authority leaned on uncertainty to justify itself, and she nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that the words had been said, and behind her the engine continued its low hum, steady and constant, a mechanical reminder that time was still moving forward even if the moment felt paused, and the wind shifted again, carrying the faint metallic scent of the road along with it, brushing past the two officers and the lone truck like an unseen current, and somewhere in the distance, a highway sign creaked softly, its metal frame adjusting to the temperature drop, a small sound that would have gone unnoticed in any other moment. But here it landed clearly, sharply, because everything else had gone so still, and Cole finally looked down at the license again, reading the name more carefully this time. Danielle Brooks, his brow tightening, just slightly, as if the name did not align with the picture he had already constructed, and he turned the card over, checking the details again, the expiration, the state, the endorsements, taking just a second longer than necessary, and when he looked back up, something in his posture had shifted, not softened, not yet, but less certain, less anchored in whatever assumption had brought him here, and Danielle remained exactly where she was, shoulders relaxed, hands visible, breathing steady, not pushing, not retreating, simply holding her place in the moment as if she understood something the night itself had not yet revealed, and the silence between them stretched again, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something waiting just beneath the surface to be recognized. The second officer's voice finally broke the silence from behind the trailer, low but clear enough to carry across the still air, saying that the seal looked intact, that there were no visible signs of tampering, and the words landed between them like something that did not support the tension that had been building, and Cole did not respond immediately, his jaw tightening again as if the confirmation complicated more than it resolved, and Danielle noticed that too, the way his fingers adjusted, slightly around her license, the way his stance shifted just enough to suggest hesitation, and she let a second pass before speaking again, her tone unchanged, steady, grounded, asking if there was anything else they needed from her so she could continue her route, and the question was simple, but it carried weight, not because of how it was said, but because of how it was held, calm without yielding, respectful without shrinking. And for a moment Cole looked at her, as if trying to place something he could not quite name, something about the way she stood there, not defensive, not compliant, just certain, and he glanced back toward his patrol car where the radio crackled again, louder this time, the dispatcher repeating a detail that no longer aligned, correcting a plate number, clarifying a vehicle description that did not match Danielle's truck at all, and the correction lingered in the air, undeniable now, not something that could be interpreted differently, and the second officer stepped closer, lowering his flashlight slightly, his voice quieter when he spoke this time, saying it might not be the right vehicle after all, and Cole exhaled slowly through his nose, the kind of breath that did not release tension so much as acknowledge it. And he looked back at Danielle, really looked this time, not scanning, not measuring, but observing, and there was a flicker of something there, not apology, not yet, but recognition that the situation was no longer holding the shape it had when it began, and Danielle remained still, her posture unchanged, her hands relaxed at her sides, the wind brushing lightly against her jacket as the highway stretched out behind her in both directions, empty and patient, and she could feel the moment shifting, subtle but real, like a change in pressure before a storm moves on. And Cole finally handed the license back, his movements slower now, less sharp, and when their fingers briefly touched as she took it, there was no tension in her hand, only the same steady presence she had held since the beginning, and he cleared his throat slightly, saying they were just doing their job, that they had to follow up on reports, that it was nothing personal, the words sounding practiced, familiar, but thinner now in the quiet that followed, and Danielle nodded once, not agreeing, not arguing, simply acknowledging the statement as something that had been said, and she tucked the license back into her wallet with the same deliberate care as before, and for a moment no one spoke, the red and blue lights still cycling across the asphalt, across the side of her truck, across their uniforms, painting everything in motion even as the scene itself had gone still, and somewhere far off a truck horn echoed faintly, a long, low sound that seemed to travel across miles of open road before fading into nothing, and Cole shifted his stance again, stepping back just slightly now, creating space where before there had been pressure, and he gestured loosely toward her vehicle, saying she could go once they finished up, and the words came without edge this time, without that earlier insistence, and Danielle looked at him for a brief second longer, her gaze steady, not searching for anything, not expecting anything, just seeing him as he stood there in that moment, and then she turned, not abruptly, not slowly either, just with quiet certainty, and began walking back toward the cab of her truck, her boots sounding soft against the asphalt, each step measured, grounded, as if the road itself had already accepted her return, and behind her the lights continued to flash, but their urgency had faded, their presence now just another part of the night, no longer the center of it, and as she reached the door and placed her hand on the handle, the metal cool beneath her palm, there was a brief pause, a fraction of a second where everything seemed to hold again, not in tension this time, but in something quieter, something unresolved, as if the night itself had not yet finished, revealing what it had come to show. Her hand rested on the metal handle for just a moment longer than necessary, the cool surface grounding her in the present while something quieter moved beneath it, something older than this highway, older than this night. And then she pulled the door open and climbed back into the cab with the same steady control she had carried through every second before, boots finding their place, hands returning to familiar positions, the engine's low vibration rising again through the frame as if welcoming her back into something predictable, something hers, and for a brief second she sat there without closing the door, the outside air slipping in, carrying with it the fading pulse of red and blue light that now felt less like pressure and more like background noise, and she reached forward to adjust the dashboard lights, her fingers brushing past the edge of a small, worn photograph tucked near the console, its corners slightly curled, its surface catching a faint reflection from the patrol car behind her, and she paused, not long, just enough for her thumb to press lightly against the edge of it, a quiet habit, a grounding point, before she closed the door with a soft, controlled thud that sealed the space again, isolating the hum of the engine, the faint ticking of cooling metal, and her own steady breathing, and outside, Cole watched from a few steps back, his posture no longer rigid, his shoulders lowered just enough to suggest something had shifted that he had not planned for, and the second officer stood near the rear of the trailer, no longer scanning, no longer searching, his flashlight now angled toward the ground, its beam tracing small arcs across the asphalt without purpose, and the radio crackled once more, quieter now, almost distant, confirming the corrected report, closing the loop on the call that had brought them here in the first place, and Cole reached up, pressing the button on his shoulder to acknowledge it, his voice lower than before, more measured, as if the weight of the moment had recalibrated something inside him, and inside the cab Danielle adjusted the side mirrors, her eyes moving with precision, checking angles, checking distance, not because she needed to, but because that was how she moved through the world, deliberate, exact, leaving nothing assumed, and as she shifted slightly in her seat, The sleeve of her jacket pulled back just enough to reveal a thin line of faded lettering near her wrist, barely visible in the dim light. Something that would have gone unnoticed to anyone not looking closely. Something that spoke of a past that did not announce itself. And she lowered her arm again, the fabric falling back into place, the detail disappearing as quietly as it had appeared. And she reached for the gear, her hand firm, her movements unhurried. And outside Cole took another step back, creating more space now. Enough to signal without saying that the moment had ended, or at least that it should have. And yet there was something in the way he watched her, a hesitation that lingered, as if he sensed there was more beneath the surface than he had understood at first. And the wind moved again across the open highway, carrying the dry scent of earth and distant pine, brushing past the truck, the officers, the patrol car, weaving through the scene like a quiet observer that had seen this kind of moment before. And Danielle glanced once more into the side mirror, her eyes catching Cole's reflection for a fraction of a second, not holding it, not avoiding it either, just acknowledging it before returning forward. And the engine's tone deepened slightly as she prepared to move, the truck shifting almost imperceptibly, a machine ready to continue its path. And for a brief moment, everything aligned again, the road, the vehicle, the silence, as if the interruption had been nothing more than a pause in a longer story. And yet beneath that surface, something had already changed, something that had not yet revealed its full shape. And as Danielle's foot eased forward, as the truck prepared to roll, the night seemed to hold its breath once more, not in tension, but in anticipation of what would come next. The truck rolled forward just a few inches before Danielle eased off the throttle again. The movement so slight it barely disturbed the dust beneath the tires, yet enough to shift the balance of the moment, enough to make the hum of the engine deepen and settle into a low, steady rhythm that filled the cab like a quiet presence. And she did not rush it, did not accelerate into the open highway waiting ahead, because something in the air still had not fully released, something subtle but persistent that lingered just beyond the edge of sound. And in the side mirror she saw it before she heard it. The flicker of movement from the patrol car as its door opened wider, the silhouette of Officer Cole stepping forward again, not with the urgency from before, not with the same sharp edges, but with hesitation that carried its own kind of weight. And Danielle's hand rested lightly on the wheel, not tightening, not withdrawing, simply holding steady as her eyes tracked his reflection. Without turning her head, and the truck idled in place, engine alive, waiting, as the seconds stretched, and outside Cole approached slowly, stopping a few feet from the cab this time, not closing the distance completely, leaving space where earlier there had been pressure, and he lifted a hand slightly, not signaling authority now, but asking for attention, and Danielle responded by lowering the window halfway, the glass sliding down with a soft mechanical sound that cut cleanly through the quiet night, and the cool air slipped back inside, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and distant pine. And Cole cleared his throat once, the sound small but deliberate, as if choosing his words required more effort than giving commands had just minutes earlier. And he spoke, his voice lower, more measured, saying there had been a misunderstanding, that the report they received had been incorrect, that they had acted on incomplete information, and the explanation came out slower than before, less practiced, more aware of itself. And Danielle listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, her posture still grounded in that same calm presence. And when he finished, there was a pause, not awkward, not rushed, just present. And she asked a single question, her voice even, asking whether her cargo had been officially cleared, and the specificity of it shifted the moment again, because it did not engage with the apology, did not react to the tone. It focused on the procedure, on the facts. And Cole nodded, glancing briefly toward the second officer who confirmed it with a quiet affirmation. And for a moment Cole seemed to search for something else to say, something to close the gap that had opened between what this stop had been and what it had become. But the words did not come easily, and Danielle watched him, not waiting, not expecting, simply present in the space as it was. And then she spoke again, her tone unchanged, stating that she would be documenting the stop in her log, that the time, location, and reason would be recorded as part of her standard route report. And the words landed with quiet precision, not confrontational, not defensive, but clear, grounded in fact. And Cole's expression shifted slightly at that. a flicker of awareness passing through his eyes as the weight of documentation settled into the moment, and he nodded once, slower this time, acknowledging it without argument, and the wind moved again across the highway, brushing past the truck, the patrol car, the officers, carrying with it the sense that the moment was no longer theirs to control, that it had already begun to move beyond them, and Danielle raised the window again, the glass sealing the cab with a soft click, and inside the engine's steady hum returned to prominence, filling the space with something constant, something reliable, and she adjusted her grip on the wheel, her hands firm but relaxed, and this time when she pressed the accelerator, the truck responded fully, rolling forward with quiet power, the weight of it moving smoothly onto the open road, and in the side mirror the red and blue lights began to shrink, their reflections fading across the metal surface of the trailer until they became distant pulses against the dark. And Cole stood there watching as the truck merged back into the highway, his posture still, his shoulders slightly lowered, as if the moment had left something behind that he had not expected to carry, and the night closed in again around the road, the silence returning not as tension, but as something deeper, something that held the memory of what had just happened without needing to speak it aloud. The highway opened wide ahead of her, a long stretch of dark asphalt cutting through the Arizona night like a quiet promise, and Danielle let the truck settle into its rhythm, the engine smoothing out beneath her as the speed climbed steadily to 65 miles per hour, then holding there, stable, controlled, the way she preferred it, not rushed, not delayed, just precise, and inside the cab the world narrowed again to the familiar, the soft glow of the dashboard, the faint hum of the air vents, the subtle vibration through the steering wheel that told her everything was running exactly as it should, and for a while she said nothing, did nothing beyond driving, her eyes moving between the road and the mirrors with quiet consistency, scanning, adjusting, maintaining, and the lights from the patrol car were gone now, fully absorbed into the distance behind her, leaving only darkness and the occasional reflective sign flashing past in brief silver streaks, and the silence inside the cab. Deepened, not empty, but full of something that needed space, something that could not be rushed, and Danielle reached down toward the console, her fingers brushing past the logbook again, pausing this time as she opened it slowly, the pages worn but orderly, each line filled with careful handwriting, times, miles, stops, everything accounted for, everything recorded, and she flipped to the current entry, her pen moving across the page with steady strokes, marking the location, the time, the nature of the stop, her handwriting clean, controlled, leaving no ambiguity, no space for interpretation, just facts placed exactly where they belonged, and when she finished, she closed the book gently, not snapping it shut, just letting it rest back in place as if the act itself had settled something inside her, and the truck continued forward, the road stretching endlessly ahead, framed by low desert brush and distant silhouettes of mountains that barely broke the horizon, and the sky above was clear, scattered with stars that flickered faintly against the vast darkness, steady and distant, like quiet witnesses to everything below, and Danielle's grip on the wheel remained relaxed, her shoulders loose, her breathing even, but her eyes carried something deeper now, something reflective, as if the moment from earlier had not left her, but had simply changed shape, moving from the outside world into something internal, something quieter, and she adjusted the rear view mirror slightly, the small motion bringing her own reflection into view for just a second, her face calm, composed, unchanged on the surface, and then her gaze shifted away again, returning to the road ahead, and the hum of the engine filled the space once more, consistent, grounding, a sound that did not question, did not challenge, just existed. And after a few miles she reached for the radio again, turning it on low, the voice of a late-night host fading in, talking about weather patterns, about temperatures dropping into the high 30s by morning, about clear skies across northern Arizona, the tone steady, neutral, a reminder of a world that continued moving beyond any single moment, and Danielle listened without really listening, the words passing through the cab like background noise, something to fill the space without demanding attention, and her eyes remained on the road, focused, alert, and yet there was a softness there too, something that came not from weakness, but from control, from knowing when not to react. when to let something pass without letting it define you. And the truck rolled on, mile after mile, the white lines beneath her tires repeating in a steady rhythm, marking distance, marking time, marking movement forward, and somewhere deep in that rhythm, something settled, not forgotten, not dismissed, but placed where it belonged, held without needing to be carried any further than necessary. And the night continued to stretch ahead, quiet, open, waiting. The road ahead remained steady, the white lane markings unfolding in a quiet rhythm beneath the truck as Danielle kept her speed consistent, the engine holding its low, controlled hum. And for several miles nothing changed except the distance behind her growing longer, the past fading into something less immediate, until a faint flicker of headlights appeared far ahead in the opposite lane, then another, then a cluster. Small signs of life returning to the highway after the long stretch of isolation, and Danielle's eyes tracked them briefly before returning to the road, her hands steady on the wheel, her posture unchanged, and then the radio shifted, the tone of the broadcast cutting slightly as a new voice came through, sharper, more alert, a brief update interrupting the calm, mentioning a correction issued across multiple channels regarding a misidentified vehicle involved in a reported incident earlier that night, the details aligning in a way that was not accidental, not vague, but specific enough to echo the moment she had just driven away from. And Danielle's gaze did not change, but something in her focus sharpened, her attention narrowing just slightly as she listened, the voice continuing, clarifying that the original report had been inaccurate, that the vehicle in question had already been located elsewhere, that no further stops were required, and the words settled into the cab with a quiet finality, confirming what she had already known without needing to hear it spoken aloud. And she reached over and lowered the volume just a fraction, not turning it off, just reducing it to a background presence again, and outside the landscape began to shift subtly, the flat openness giving way to gentle elevation, the road curving slightly as it approached a rise, and as the truck climbed, the horizon opened up ahead, revealing a distant set of lights near a highway junction, faint but steady, marking a point where the road would eventually split, where choices would be made about direction, about destination, and Danielle adjusted her grip slightly, her fingers settling more firmly around the wheel as she guided the truck through the curve, the movement smooth, controlled, practiced, and as she crested the rise, a sign passed on the right, reflective lettering catching her headlights, indicating mileage to the next fuel stop, 23 miles, a detail she noted without effort, automatically calculating distance, time, fuel, everything aligning in her mind with quiet precision. And then her eyes moved briefly to the side mirror again, a habit, a constant check. And in that reflection there was nothing now, no flashing lights, no figures, just the long empty stretch of highway trailing behind her, clean, uninterrupted, as if the moment that had taken place there had already dissolved into the distance, leaving no visible trace. And yet she knew better than to think it had disappeared entirely. Because moments like that did not vanish, they shifted, they settled into memory, into awareness, into something that shaped how the next moment would be met. And Danielle's expression remained calm. But there was clarity there now, a quiet certainty that did not need to be spoken. And as the truck descended from the rise and the road leveled out again, the engine maintaining its steady pace, she reached down briefly and adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, the fabric pulling back just slightly once more, revealing that same faint line of lettering near her wrist, this time a little clearer in the soft dashboard light, a mark that carried weight without explanation, and her fingers rested there for a second, not lingering, just acknowledging, before the sleeve fell back into place, covering it again as naturally as it had been revealed, and she returned both hands fully to the wheel, her eyes forward, focused on the road ahead, and the truck continued on, moving through the night with quiet purpose, the miles unfolding one after another, steady, certain, as if whatever had been questioned earlier had now found its answer, not in words, but in the way she carried herself, in the way she continued forward without hesitation, without needing to prove anything more than what was already clear in the silence of the road. The highway lights ahead grew clearer as Danielle approached the junction, the faint glow resolving into the structured geometry of a late-night truck stop, Rows of parked rigs lined up under tall lamps that cast a pale yellow wash across the pavement, and she eased her foot slightly off the accelerator, letting the truck decelerate naturally. The engine shifting its tone just enough to signal the change without disrupting the steady control she maintained, and as she guided the vehicle onto the exit ramp, the curve of the road narrowing her focus, the outside world briefly compressing into the concrete barriers and reflective markers that flashed past in precise intervals. She remained composed, her hands firm but relaxed on the wheel, her eyes tracking every detail without effort, and the transition from open highway to structured space felt almost symbolic. The vast silence of the road giving way to a contained environment where everything had its place, its order, its rules. And as she rolled into the lot, the truck's headlights swept across the parked trailers, revealing company logos, worn metal surfaces, and the quiet stillness of drivers resting inside. And she guided her rig into an open lane near the fueling station, bringing it to a controlled stop with the same deliberate precision that had carried her through the night. And for a moment she did not move, her hands still on the wheel, the engine idling beneath her, the soft vibration filling the cab like a steady pulse. And outside, the air looked colder here, the kind that settled into your bones if you stood in it too long. The digital sign near the pumps reading 39 degrees, and she reached forward, turning off the radio completely this time, allowing the silence to return fully, not empty, but intentional. And then she leaned back slightly in her seat, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction, not from exhaustion, but from completion of a segment. A checkpoint reached, a moment passed, and her eyes drifted briefly toward the windshield, where the glass reflected a faint outline of her own face against the dim interior light, calm, steady, unchanged, and yet carrying something deeper beneath the surface, something that had been reinforced, not shaken, by what had happened earlier. And she reached down again toward the console, opening the logbook once more, reviewing the entry she had made, her eyes scanning each line, confirming its accuracy, its clarity, every detail accounted for. And she added one more note, a small addition, precise and factual, then closed the book again with quiet finality. And as she did, her sleeve shifted slightly, revealing that same faint marking near her wrist once more, this time catching a clearer angle of light, enough to make out its structured lettering, not decorative, not casual, but official in its simplicity, a remnant of a different life that had not disappeared, only changed form. And she adjusted the sleeve again without hesitation, covering it as naturally as before, not hiding, just returning it to where it belonged. And then she opened the door and stepped down onto the pavement, her boots making a soft, grounded sound against the concrete, the cold air immediately brushing against her face, sharp but clean. And she stood there for a second, looking out across the lot, the rows of trucks, the quiet movement of a few distant figures, the steady hum of fuel pumps in the background, and everything felt ordinary again, balanced, as if the world had reset itself without needing to acknowledge what had come before. And Danielle took a slow breath, the cool air filling her lungs, steady and controlled, and she began walking toward the pump, her pace unhurried, her posture upright, carrying herself with that same quiet certainty, the kind that did not need recognition, did not need validation, because it was already complete on its own. And behind her, the truck stood still under the lights, engine idling, ready to continue, just as she was. The fuel pump clicked softly as Danielle secured the nozzle in place, the low mechanical sound blending into the quiet hum of the truck stop, and she stepped back just enough to give herself space, her hands slipping into the pockets of her jacket as she watched the numbers begin to climb, gallons ticking upward in steady increments, precise, predictable. And for a moment, she simply stood there, grounded in the ordinary rhythm of the task, the kind that did not demand anything from her beyond presence. And the overhead lights cast a pale glow across the pavement, reflecting faintly off the chrome surfaces of nearby rigs, creating small points of light that shimmered with every subtle movement of the air. And Danielle lifted her gaze slightly, looking out across the lot where a few other drivers moved quietly between trucks and building, their footsteps soft, their conversations low, nothing urgent, nothing forced, just the quiet continuation of lives moving forward on their own paths. And she exhaled slowly, her breath visible for a brief second in the cool air before fading. And there was a stillness inside her now, not the kind that followed tension, but the kind that came after resolution, after something had been seen clearly and placed where it belonged. And she reached up briefly, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve again, the fabric brushing against her wrist. And for just a moment that faint marking caught the light once more, its lines structured, intentional, a silent reminder of discipline, of training, of a past that had shaped her without needing to define her. And she let the sleeve fall back into place naturally, not concealing, not revealing, simply existing as part of her, and the pump continued its steady rhythm, the numbers climbing toward completion, and Danielle's eyes returned to the display, watching without impatience, her posture relaxed, her weight balanced evenly. And behind her the truck idled with a quiet strength, its presence solid, dependable, a machine built to carry weight across distance without hesitation, much like the way she carried herself through the night. And when the pump finally slowed and clicked to a stop, she stepped forward again, removing the nozzle with a controlled motion, securing it back into place with a soft metallic sound. That marked the end of the task, and she tightened the fuel cap, her movements efficient, practiced, and then she paused for just a second, her hand resting lightly against the side of the truck, feeling the faint vibration of the engine through the metal, steady, constant, and she looked up once more at the open sky beyond the lights, the stars still there, quiet, distant, unchanged, and in that moment there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to resolve, only the road ahead and the quiet certainty that she would meet it the same way she had met everything before, with clarity, with control, with a strength that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. And she turned back toward the cab, her steps even, unhurried, and as she climbed back inside, the door closing with a soft, final sound, the world narrowed again to the space she knew, the engine, the wheel, the road waiting just beyond the windshield. And when she eased the truck forward once more, merging back toward the highway, the lights of the truck stopped fading behind her. The night opened up again, wide and silent, and the road stretched out ahead, carrying her forward into the distance, where nothing needed to be said for everything to be clear.